I'll leave it that way. As Sharon said, we're going to be talking about specifically this month or this presentation, summer and fall lawn care. You're going to see maybe just a touch of information that relates to spring lawn care that carries over into summer and fall. But for the most part, we are going to uh, be focusing on lawn care as it relates to the warmer months and going into the cooler months, which is seeding season and some other very important operations for your lawn. But the first thing I've learned when working with groups, and I unfortunately can't poll you guys today or talk to you guys up front, but I usually ask my group the first thing, because I have so many versions of my presentation, I ask groups, what are your expectations for a home lawn? If you're looking for a lawn that looks perfect year round, tall fescue lawn that just looks green and perfect despite summer drought, weed pressure, so on and so forth, that's one set of expectations. Or if you're in the opposite end of those expectations, where you're of the philosophy green is good, then we can work with that expectation, which I consider low input lawn care. The two are different, because if you have super high expectations, you're probably going to be working with some weed control. You're probably going to have irrigation, and I certainly work with a few homeowners, a lot of park systems, a lot of our bigger horse farms here, they maintain irrigated sections of their farm, but you're probably going to be working with things like irrigation if you have high expectations of uniformity, color, and just good quality turf. But as a homeowner, you can have a great looking lawn without an irrigation system, or without a tremendous amount of weed control. But some of these things you're going to kind of have to get to the point to where your lawn's thick and move on from there. And we'll talk more about those individual issues during the presentation. Seasonal growth curves, I always like to throw this presentation in, because we're probably about right here now where we have been experiencing in Kentucky cooler nights and cooler days for a period of time. That's not the case now, because most of the state has warmed up drastically. But we've had tremendous lawn growth. I don't know about you guys in Western Kentucky and Eastern Kentucky, but in Central Kentucky, we've had a really good spring for growing grass. During the springtime is when we get a lot of our shoot growth and we get a lot of our root growth. And that has been the case this spring in Kentucky. We've had, for the most part, adequate moisture. We've had cool nights and days that have warmed up slowly. Now, all of a sudden, like Kentucky normally does, we went from, seems like, freezing temperatures to 40-degree temperatures. We've jumped all the way to 90-degree temperatures, and that's going to be quite a shock for our lawns. And here in Central Kentucky, Sharon and I were just talking before everyone got a chance to join, that in Central Kentucky, we're really dry right now. There's some parts that may be getting rain, and other parts of the state, I know, as Amy mentioned, that are getting some rain. We're really dry here in Central Kentucky. Not only dry, but we're hot. So we have summer-like conditions right now. It's early summer. We're entering into that early summer period where there's very little root and shoot growth unless you have an irrigated lawn that's under a high maintenance schedule with multiple fertilizer applications per year. The average Kentucky lawn, the average homeowner that I work with, probably over 95% of the time there's no irrigation involved, and they only fertilize typically in the fall of the year. If they're doing a good job fertilizing, they're making one application of fertilizer in the fall with no irrigation. So we have to deal with these seasonal realities of our primarily cool season lawns, and that's what the presentation's on today. Most of what I'm saying today applies to just cool season grasses, particularly tall fescue, which is the grass that we recommend. What I recommend for most Kentucky lawns is a turf top tall fescue, one of the turf tops. You take your pick. There's lots of amazing varieties to choose from nowadays. Some common things that I see that causes lawns to suffer during summer drought, and the reason I specifically put this slide in, I added it at the last minute, was it's not been uncommon the last 3 to 5 years, at least here in Central Kentucky, we've had extended hot, dry spells. But these are some things on this slide. These are things that causes lawns to suffer, home lawns to suffer. Point one is growing on shallow or heavy clay soils, which means you have limited root growth. I see that a lot here in the county. Now, you may be in a county or a location within your county that is blessed with the perfect loam, deep soil. That's not always the case, especially in a subdivision doesn't always have the best soil. I also have a lawn within my subdivision that's on a south facing slope. Not only is it south facing, but it's on a slope where the water runs off very quickly. Those areas in the summer really suffer. They get super hot, they're south facing, and they're super dry. So both of those things work against you with cool season lawns. And also, we'll talk a lot about this point during the presentation today. You have to be very careful with broadleaf weed control products that are applied when it's hot and dry. I really caution you about applying broadleaf weed control during these conditions where your lawn's not doing well, your weeds are not growing very active. Not only do you hurt your weeds, but you can also hurt your cool season lawns. We'll talk more about that in just a few minutes. And some other things that I see that causes lawns to struggle in Kentucky, unirrigated lawns, is that you mow during the heat of the day. And I've come to appreciate the fact that this does make a difference. If we're in an extended drought above 90 degrees, I personally don't recommend mowing during the heat of the day. Usually when the sun goes down, the temperature drops a few degrees. It makes a big difference on the damage that your lawn's going to receive if you have to mow. So just kind of keep that in mind, especially if you're mowing with dull mower blades. And I think I included a slide presentation in this version. You're mowing with dull mower blades at temperatures above 90 degrees. You shut those grass roots down for 30 to 40 days. You get no root development. And that's not a good situation to be in. But I see that quite a bit, especially with parks that are unirrigated, these large areas where they just have to mow. They're on a schedule and they have to mow at regular intervals. They have to mow during the day when people are working, but I see tire tracks, I see damage. But grass that's growing in the shade or lawn grass that's growing in the shade where it has to compete with tree roots. I'm sure all of you guys have seen these trees in our landscapes with nice grass in the spring that's growing under those trees. And that gets really hard, really dry around those trees because those trees are sucking up all the moisture. That grass is going to suffer. Also, high traffic areas where you have children, pets or equipment, high traffic area, of course, it's going to get compaction, and those hot, dry conditions are just going to make things worse. Here's something we don't talk a lot about, but I like to put in my presentations. But if the surface cover of the grass thins out, that's going to really increase the soil temperature. And what high soil temperatures do in Kentucky for cool season grasses is it shuts the grass down. And that's one of the things that a good thick turf does is it shades itself. A little bit of thatch will also actually be beneficial in Kentucky for a cool season lawn. We'll have one or two slides on thatch, but thatch is not always bad, particularly in Kentucky. It'll actually help shade and cool the ground as long as it's not too thick. But those high soil temperatures really are tough on cool season grasses. And lawns that become, of course, heavily infested with weeds like crabgrass. These summer loving weeds, when our lawns are just sitting there, they're not growing. How many of you guys, I wish I could see a show of hands, but you can't, but how many of you all just noticed that the only thing growing in your lawn are stuff like white clover, which may or may not be a weed to you, or you see stuff like Johnson grass. That's the only things that you see growing are these summer loving weeds. They have a competitive advantage. They're growing your cool season lawn is not growing. So we see that a lot. And what that does is give those weeds a chance to get started in your lawn and get a foothold, and they're going to cause trouble, down the road, not only this year, but next year, depending on what type of weed it is. Other causes of general home lawn issues, I wanted to start with the real generic general stuff first, is heavy nitrogen fertilization at the wrong time of year. That's a common thing that I see. People put a lot of nitrogen down in the spring. It can cause some issues that we'll talk about. Poor drainage, unless you correct the drainage. Being too wet is as bad as being too dry. In either scenario, roots will not thrive. If it's too wet, there's no oxygen in the soil, and that will kill lawn grasses as quickly as being too dry. Heavy thatch, this point here is something I rarely ever see, but I'm starting to put it in presentations just because I like to talk about it. It's on a chart that I use commonly. But those lawns that I work with where folks have irrigation systems and they're putting down 4 to 6 applications of nitrogen a year, they are the ones that have trouble with thatch. And not even always them. If they have bluegrass and then they have on top of that irrigation and a highly maintained bluegrass lawn, they're probably going to have to deal with thatch. Everybody else, probably not. Soil compaction, I see that a lot. This is a huge one, short mowing height. That'll be all throughout the presentation. Basically, do not mow low. pH issues are pretty common. It's not what you probably think. A lot of times if our lawns, home lawns are not growing correctly or growing like we think they should, it's not unusual to run into homeowners that put lime down. Well, too much lime can adversely affect your lawn. It can create as many problems as it solves, or as you think it'll solve. It'll create issues with nutrient uptake, even as much so as a low pH lawn. And root injury from pests like Japanese beetles, white grubs, grub damage. We'll see that in fescue lawns, which are oftentimes when the weather turns cooler, that'll make a recovery. Or damage from chemicals. Broadleaf weed controls that are put down when it's hot and dry can damage your lawn. They really can. And just simply high temperature. These high temperatures, these are things that I see every week during the summer when I go make site visits here in Bourbon County where I'm located. This is the chart that we're going to use for the rest of the presentation, basically, and we'll specifically focus on this area of time from June through November. And if you look at this chart here, I'm just going to put that there. The presentation is organized by management practice. That's how I'm organizing this presentation. Aerifying, liming, mowing, mower maintenance, not so much on mower maintenance, other than sharpen your blades at least once a year in the spring. And if you're like me, you probably need to do it once in the summer because my mower blades get dull and it causes a lot of problems, believe it or not, with cool season lawns. And we'll talk a little bit about that, and I'll have some pictures. Broadleaf and grassy weed control, seeding, sodding, and then some on white grub control. I'm going to include a little section on that because I see it so many times. When I'm making site visits, I see grub damage, particularly here in Bourbon County. It may not be such an issue where you're at, but I see a lot of white grub issues here locally. So these are the practices we're going to be focusing on, and anything that has a green line here is appropriate to do during this time of year. And we'll talk about each one of those individually. Okay, the first thing we'll talk about is we'll go over aerifying your lawn, and just take a few minutes to talk about that, not a lot of time. But thatch, the thing to remember, we'll talk about thatch first, and then aerifying and dethatching, which is two separate operations on home lawns. I think more people could probably benefit from aerifying lawns than they could from dethatching. I see a lot of people dethatching low maintained fescue lawns, and they just don't develop thatch for multiple reasons. They're not highly maintained. They don't produce a lot of organic matter that falls down. In other words, thatch is this organic layer that if you're producing enough organic matter, you're producing it faster than it can decompose. That's what creates thatch in a nutshell. Some things can make it worse, but that's what creates thatch problems. If you're growing a bluegrass lawn, the root top system on bluegrass lawns also creates thatch problems. So you'll see if someone has a bluegrass lawn, they'll dethatch a whole lot more than someone will with a fescue lawn. But the thing to remember is thatch is usually not a problem, especially if you don't irrigate here in Kentucky. Thatch is usually not a problem. In fact, I said earlier, a little thatch helps regulate soil temperature on a cool season grass lawn, especially if that lawn grass gets thin. If it's got a little organic matter layer, that actually helps decrease soil temperature, and that's a really good thing in Kentucky to keep that soil temperature down. So much so that I have a little bit of shade on one portion of my lawn, and that lawn grass, it's a cool season turf fescue. it always does better than that southern facing slope that I mentioned earlier. It does so much better because it gets a little afternoon shade. It does great without any irrigation, just a small section of my lawn. And the only reason that is because it's shaded. And thatch helps provide shade, so it's not always a bad thing. If you would like more information on aerifying and dethatching lawns, you can see our publication. The publication's name is AGR-54. And if you go look for that online, just type in University of Kentucky AGR-54, and that should be your first hit. But as far as measuring a thatch layer, I usually only get concerned when I'm doing assessments. Particularly this applies to golf courses and those areas where they do a lot of, intensive management. But the thatch layer is usually on this picture lower left. This would be the thatch layer. It's this really dense section of organic matter, and if that's less than a half an inch, I'm generally not concerned about it. If it's more than half an inch, you need to be a little bit concerned about that, because it can restrict water movement into the soil, nutrient movement, and oxygen movement. It can restrict all of those things to an extent. That's the negatives of thatch buildup. That's why we don't like a lot of thatch on lawns. That's this area here, this dense material. Not a problem in most home lawns. If it's over half an inch, I become concerned, and that's when I make my decision. Some reasons thatch might build up is there's not enough earthworms present. You have acid soils, microorganisms that break down that organic matter. They just don't work really well if your soil's really acid. If it's outside of the range of a pH of 6 to 8, you don't have those breakdown organisms that take care of thatch. Or if you put a lot of high nitrogen, and if you continually put a lot of high nitrogen on your home lawn, that can create an issue over the years, particularly with bluegrass, not so much with fescue, remember. And once again, Kentucky bluegrass, if you're growing that, you have to be aware of thatch because it can become an issue. Other than that, don't worry too much about thatch for your home lawn, especially if it's not irrigated. If you ever do have to dethatch, I'll just tell you that a rake type dethatcher with the little flexible tines do not do a good job. I've never had a good experience with one of those. I don't think they do a great job. What you need is a dethatching unit like this that you can get from rental stores that have these sling blades. They cut down and bring up that dead organic layer. They're designed to do that. They're purpose built. They're expensive units. They're heavy. They do a good job. If you ever find that you need to dethatch, make sure that you're using one of the units here in this picture. The smaller units with just the little rake style tines, they don't do a very good job, and I don't find that they're effective. They don't do nearly as good a job as these larger purpose built units. I think most lawns can more benefit from core aerifying, and that's primarily why I would core aerify a home lawn, is if I have an area that I know is highly compacted. That's when I use one of these core aerifiers. Now, once again, the small units, the little pull behind units on home tractors and things like that that you can get and put concrete blocks on, they generally don't do nearly as good a job as the units that you can go to a rental place and rent. Those have hollow tines that just really aggressively ram into the soil and do a great job of pulling up cores from 2 to 4 inches into the soil, and they'll deposit those cores on top of the soil. They'll relieve what we call surface tension in the turf. They will allow water to more easily infiltrate into a compacted area where the soil's compacted. They'll allow nutrients to compact or move into that area a lot easier, so you get water and fertilizer moving into your lawn a whole lot easier. And these really help in areas that are compacted. The thing to remember there is that a lot of people you'll see running these on, you'll wonder why they're running them in the fall time of the year. If you remember back from the seasonal chart I showed you earlier, I usually recommend core aerifying. If you have a compacted area, do that in the fall, because then you can go back behind that core aerifier and you can throw down grass seed, and you'll get a surprising amount of grass coming up in those holes. The grass seed will fall down in the holes, make good seed to soil contact, and it'll come up, and you'll get a lot of side benefit of core aerifying your lawn by actually being able to overseed your lawn and have a lot of grass come up. So remember that. That's why I normally recommend core aerifying in the fall of the year when it's the normal seeding window for cool season grasses. And here's what it looks like. I mean, it does look kind of messy. You have these little soil cores that'll lay on top of your lawn. That's not they go away fairly quickly with seasonal rains. That's another reason to do it in the fall time of the year where we have more periodic rains. They quickly dissolve, go back into the soil, and they also have a side benefit besides seeding. If you're growing a bluegrass lawn, that actually can aid in helping you take care of thatch. So there are some benefits to using a core aerifier on your lawn. I have a section of my lawn that's really compacted. It's around playground equipment where the neighborhood kids come and play with my son. It's really, really compacted. I'm probably going to have to run one of those over that area this year because it's really compacted. My golden test for testing whether or not my home lawn's compacted is I just take a common pocket knife or a small kitchen knife. I'll take that and just stick that into the soil of my lawn using just my thumb, just the pressure from my thumb. That knife blade should go into the soil easy. If you can't press a pocket knife blade into the soil using just your thumb, that soil could probably benefit from core aerifying. It's probably a little compacted. That's my test. It's not a real fancy test, but that's what I use when I'm walking around golf courses or I'm walking around parks or home lawns and we have a question, is my soil compacted? I'll just take out my pocket knife and just kind of slip it into the soil using my thumb just to do a quick test. And you can do that as a homeowner. Let's talk a little bit about mowing. You'll notice on the chart here, of course, in Kentucky, we're mowing all during some during the warmer months. I don't know if you're like me, but I'll go from mowing every 4 to 5 days in the spring to in the summer. I may not mow, but every 2.5 weeks, but it's something we have to deal with almost year round in Kentucky. Some quick facts about mowing. You've probably heard this before if you've ever been in an extension presentation. We recommend mowing no more than a third to a half of the leaf blade height. You've probably made the observation in the past that if you went on vacation for 2 or 3 weeks in the spring or the fall, you come back and your lawn's gotten high and you had to mow it, your grass will get stunted if you remove a lot of that top growth. And that's literally what happens. The root growth really slows down. If you remove more than 30% at a time of the total leaf blade height, your roots really slow down. And I have a slide on that here in just a second. Mow turf in shady areas higher, and all you're trying to do then is maximize leaf blade surface to catch more sunlight. It's a pretty simple principle. We recommend mowing tall fescue lawns 3.5 to 4 inches high anyways, and that's pretty high. But if you're mowing any lower than that and you have a shady area, consider mowing those shady areas as high as possible. If you have a little bit of brown patch that you've worked with the local extension office and diagnosing, you can mow. Sometimes we'll recommend mowing slightly lower to let sunlight in so that turf dries out a little quicker. That'll be one of the few times we recommend a lower mowing height on tall fescue. It's generally best not to mow when it's completely wet for obvious reasons, that the grass gets clumpy, but also you can spread diseases. I've already said it once, but do not mow when it's above 90 degrees. You can do damage. When you're walking across a lawn and it's above 90 degrees and it's hot and dry, the grass almost feels crunchy. That's not a good scenario to mow in. And keep your mower blades sharp. Some mowing heights for common turf grasses, tall fescue, 3 to 4 inches. It's the highest of all of these on this list. The reason for that being, if you look over here at our little diagram here, you'll see that the root depth corresponds roughly to how high you mow. In other words, another way to say that is the higher you mow, the deeper your roots will go. On home lawns, if you have a real shallow mowing height, we've seen it time and again, you tend to have shallow roots. And what's the problem with shallow roots? Well, if you have an extended dry period, you have a situation where your lawn grass is not going to do well. So one of the drought proofing practices you can do as homeowners is to make sure you're mowing at 3 to 4 inches high to try to ensure a deeper root system that can go find water when it needs to, when it gets drier. A little bit about grass clippings. I think most of us are aware of the fact that we don't really need to remove grass clippings from our tall fescue lawns because grass clippings don't really cause that many issues with thatch buildup. We've already kind of addressed that issue, but there are some situations where you might want to remove the lawn clippings in special situations, such as if you have a bluegrass lawn and you know you have a thatch problem, you can remove the grass clippings to not make the problem worse. If you have a specific disease problem and you want to remove, like during brown patch on home lawn, sometimes I'll recommend using a grass catcher to take some of those clippings off the lawn. If you've been away on vacation and you know that your lawn has gotten tall, you may want to catch the grass to avoid clumping, to avoid those heavy deposits of grass. You may want to avoid that. And also, if you have a lot of weed seeds on your lawn and the only thing that's been growing in your lawn has been the weeds and they're getting ready to go to seed, I do catch that in my grass catcher, and then I kind of go and compost that in my compost pile if I have a lot of weed seeds. But some reasons not to catch your grass clippings, these are pretty easy. Almost half of a grass's fertilizer needs can be supplied through grass clippings falling back down, going through the decomposition process, and they release nitrogen back into the soil. That's a huge benefit of leaving those grass clippings on your lawn. You don't have that loss of organic matter. That's always a benefit to most Kentucky soils. Organic matter in a soil is generally a good thing. All of those are reasons to leave your grass clippings where they are. Here's a real quick slide. I think this was from our turf specialist. He's no longer at the university, but this was in a presentation that really struck me, is the effect of mowing height and how much of the grass blade we're removing and its effect on root growth. If you remove around 40% of the top growth of a fescue lawn, your effects on root growth is that the root development slowed down but not stopped. But if you go past 40%, and this is through some study a few years ago, maybe through Penn State, I forget. Andy Rideout or one of our other turf guys that's an agent may know. But this study was done where if you remove more than 40%, you really start to have a negative impact on roots. At 50%, 35% of the roots only start growing again after a month. So if you remove half the top growth, let's say you've been on vacation, you come back, you have to mow your grass after it's grown up too high. It's going to take a month for those roots of that grass to start growing again because you've shocked it essentially. If you have to come in and for whatever reason you have to remove 90% of the top growth, for the rest of that season, there was no documented root development at all. So it's a huge impact mowing height has on home lawns. It's a big, big deal. Here's a slide to kind of demonstrate the importance of using mower blades that are sharp. Dull mower blades, they can increase diseases because here you see these grass blades here and here, they're being torn. They're not being cut, they're sort of being torn. And if you have a disease issue, it makes the disease issue a lot worse because the disease can enter the plant easier. It reduces lawn quality because it gives a brown cast to your lawn. You see all these tips here? They're brown, whereas these tips over here that's been cut with a sharp mower blade, they still look nice and green. So if you want to make your lawn look greener, it sounds weird, but just sharpen your mower blades and you've automatically made your lawn greener because you're cutting the grass at a much cleaner angle. And it increases gasoline usage. I can't say that for my own lawn. I've switched a while back to a battery mower, so I'm going to have to make a modification to the slide sometime there. But if you're a park system, if you sharpen your blades, you can automatically save 22% on gasoline cost if you're a large operation, and that adds up over time. This slide or this picture here on the left is two scenarios. This grass here on the left shows grass after it's just been cut. Two grasses on the top here. First one and second one. One was mowed on the left with a sharp mower blade, one on the right with a dull mower blade. And we can see what these two grasses look like 48 hours after mowing. What's different down at the bottom here? What's different here and here? We see that the grass that's been mown with a sharp mower blade didn't go through the shock of having the grass torn rather than cut. So it's already growing after 48 hours. It's growing rather well. It's put in all this top growth. It's put on this growth, whereas this grass over here has no growth after 48 hours. So with all of that being said, basically folks, just sharpen your mower blades at minimal if you can. in the springtime of the year. And UK did have a really, maybe one of you guys could help me out in the comments, Sharon or Amy. UK did have a really good YouTube video on sharpening mower blades. I haven't looked for that in a while. I hope it's still out there because it was a good one on how to properly sharpen mower blades, or have someone else do it for you. But make sure you get it done at least once a year. Mowing height and season. Recent research has shown us that, as I said before, keep your mowing heights for tall fescue high, 3.5 to 4 inches. Well, what does that look like on your average home push mower? What I found is that's the top 1 or 2 settings on a push mower, and it's going to look weird if you're used to mowing lower than that, because it's going to look like your lawnmower's jacked up really high in the air. Well, it probably should be on one of those top 2 high settings. Most home mowers, their very topmost setting is either 4 to 4.5 inches. So you're really setting your mower up with your home lawn, hopefully. You can, in specific situations, lower it in the spring and fall, but I'm careful about recommending that to folks because I don't want you to forget setting your mowing height back up. If you are trying to compost leaves or bag leaves, sometimes people set their mowing height down. Just remember to set that back up before you start spring mowing and start your regular mowing back in the spring. If you set that down in the fall to clean up your lawn. A lot of people use that as a cleanup. They'll set their lawns down. It vacuums a little bit better, especially if you're bagging leaves. It does a better job if it's set a little bit lower. Just remember to raise that back up. This, to me, this slide is absolutely, to me, the biggest reason for higher mowing heights. For not only is your tall fescue lawn going to be healthier, but it's going to provide shade for the soil. I mentioned earlier, a taller mowing height is going to provide shade for the soil. What this means is the soil shaded, the soil is cooler, and that has a big impact on seed germination of weed seeds. In this particular case, go back. It has a big impact on crabgrass. Crabgrass is a real common problem in Kentucky lawns, maybe the most common weed problem that I see. But if you look at this slide in this study, once again, I forget who did the study, but it was an important one. Turf specialist shared with us a few years ago. They took different areas that all had crabgrass seed in the soil. Crabgrass seed lasts several years in the soil. So they took this soil with a known level of crabgrass seed that naturally exists in the soil, and they mowed at different heights. The one that was mown at 4 inches high had no additional crabgrass pressure. The one at 3 inches high had about 10-15% additional crabgrass. The one at 2 inches high, they were dropping the mowing height. Oh my goodness, it had 50% more crabgrass, and you can see if you're mowing at 1 inch, which is really low, had 100% more crabgrass. And it's amazing that the only thing that was changed there to provide weed control in that study was mowing heights. And simply setting your mower up provides you with some natural weed control, particularly crabgrass. It does make a big difference. A nice, thick, tall lawn will shade out and outcompete grass seed or weed seeds like crabgrass. Really, really important point of this slide, so I like to include it. We'll talk a little bit about nitrogen fertilizer now. You'll notice that on the chart here, the best time to apply nitrogen is in the fall of the year. Just remember that. There'll be some limited cases where if a homeowner has a lawn that's not growing well, they skip their fall application of nitrogen. I will recommend a half rate of nitrogen in the spring. You need to work with your local county extension agent to make sure that if you're going to apply nitrogen in the spring, you're not creating more weed problems later on. The thing to remember here is that most nitrogen under average circumstances should be applied beginning in September here in Kentucky. If you want a lot of great information on fertilizing cool season lawns, you can do a search for AGR 212. And if somebody could put the links to these in the chat, that'd be awesome. Or you can easily find that as a homeowner by searching University of Kentucky AGR 212. It's a great publication with a lot of good information on fertilizing your home lawn. A lot more information than we're going to go over today. It gets into specifics. But the fertility basics, just some quick points. What I normally recommend is that a homeowner that's not having any specific problems with pH or nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium levels, about every 3 to 5 years, take a soil sample on your home lawn, as long as you're not having trouble. But if you're trying to adjust pH, I recommend taking a soil sample every year until you get your pH where it needs to be, and then you can go on that 3 to 5 year rotation. Most lawns need an annual application of nitrogen, but not necessarily phosphorus and potassium. That means that for most homeowners, you do not need to use a complete fertilizer like 10-10-10. Something with just nitrogen like 4600, 3400, or something with just a first number with 00 followed after it. That's really probably what you need in most lawn situations. Not all, but most. It's not uncommon. I'm sure the other agents can testify to this here that do a lot of soil samples for home lawns. Most home lawn samples that I get back, the phosphorus and potassium levels are so high that our lab can't even measure the units, phosphorus and potassium in that sample. And what that becomes is that fertilizer becomes a pollutant. It's in excess and it's potentially going to move off target, particularly if you're spreading those nutrients around a lot of hard surfaces like driveways or streets. They just become a pollutant and it's wasteful. So definitely get your soil sample. Another thing to remember is cheap fertilizers work as well as expensive ones. The expensive fertilizers, there's some scenarios where I would buy coated fertilizers that have modifiers to flow easier in certain spreaders, or they have a slow release component to them. There's reasons why you would want to use specialty fertilizers that cost a lot more money. But for your average homeowner, you know, 3400 in a bag, an agriculture bag, is the same as 3400 that's sold through a lawn care company as a pellet, and it may be much cheaper. Be careful not to sling fertilizer. I always stress this. Be careful when you're spreading fertilizers not to sling fertilizer into the street or other solid surfaces. A very important point I'd like to point out. Nitrogen timing. I'd like to talk a little bit about this. We already said the best time is in the fall, but if you put down nitrogen in the spring and summer, what you're really fertilizing is all these weeds here, all the warm season weeds that you're going to have that's going to create issues with things like crabgrass, foxtail, Bermudagrass, nimblewheel, nutsedge. All of those lawn weeds are going to have a huge response to spring applied nitrogen. So that's why sometimes, unless you have a really good weed control program, you really don't want to apply nitrogen in the spring, because the weeds are going to like it more than your lawn grass is going to like it. Because remember, cool season grasses grow good in the spring, but they kind of shut down in the summer. They're not going to be able to take advantage of all the nutrients you put into the soil, but the weeds will be able to take advantage. So don't do that. Here's just a sample that for most lawns, I think in Kentucky that I've worked with homeowners fall into this low to medium category of maintenance level. You know, some lawns, if you have an irrigation system, you may be a very high maintenance level. Golf courses, they of course fall under the very high maintenance schedules. That's different than a home lawn. But for most lawns, you're going to put down an application of nitrogen somewhere between, once again, September and October. You're going to put your nitrogen down sometime then in either 1 or 2 applications. If you are working with our office to put down nitrogen, and we tell you, for instance, to put down 5 pounds of 3400, per 1,000 square feet, you can take that 5 pounds and split it into 2 applications of 2.5 pounds, one in September, one in November. That can have some benefit in some cases, but if you don't want to do that, I'd just put down 1 application sometime in October or November. 1 application of nitrogen in the fall, if you don't have an irrigated lawn, is plenty for Kentucky. And I always like to tell folks, be careful when you're using drop spreaders to put down nitrogen, because I've seen this. I'm not going to say where this was at. I'm not going to say it's my own lawn, because I've done that. That if you're using a drop top seeder and a high nitrogen source, this is where nitrogen's been applied. You can follow that drop seeder as it made its rounds. So normally what I recommend is a broadcast type spreader that has a more random pattern that they sling the fertilizer out. And I recommend doing a tic-tac-toe this way and this way on lawns. When I am applying nitrogen, I will put half of my nitrogen down one direction, and then I'll go the opposite direction across that path that I just took and apply the rest of the nitrogen. It's just so, believe it or not, I see this more often than probably I really should, because it's easy to do that. This pattern, this nitrogen pattern here, it's easy to do with drop top spreaders. So just kind of be mindful of that. Fertilizing grass in shady areas don't always help. Just kind of be mindful of that. In fact, if you use too much nitrogen in a shady area, it forces that grass to try to grow the top growth in expense of root growth, because it is a shady area. So nitrogen fertilizer really doesn't help that much in heavy shade. Just wanted you guys to be aware of that. A little bit about water management. Once again, I don't work with a lot of homeowners that have to manage water, except during long, hot, dry periods. I do see people watering in Kentucky. So I wanted to add this section into the presentation today, because you may not have an irrigation system, but you may occasionally put down water on your home lawn, because my decision to put down water is based on one thing: which is going to be more work and more expensive, me to water my home lawn to keep it alive, or to have large dead patches that I'm going to have to then go and fill back in the fall. That's my choice that I have to make. So sometimes I water, sometimes I don't. But if you decide to water in a drought, this slide here kind of gives some tips and pointers. I think I added this at the last minute. You may not have this particular slide, but apply around 1 inch to 1.5 inches of water per week. You can tell how much water you put down by getting a little cheap irrigation cup and putting out there. That if you have a sprinkler, even a little home sprinkler, it'll tell you, it'll kind of catch water and tell you when you reach 1 inch. And I recommend those to tell how much water you've put down. So about 1 inch to 1.5 inches per week during a heavy drought is what I recommend. You're going to have to put down a little bit more on those hot slopes, those south facing slopes. You're going to have to put down more water to try to take care of the moisture needs. Be aware of that. If you have an irrigation system, or if you're irrigating during a drought, just kind of keep these pointers in mind. Early morning is by far the best. 2 to 8 a.m. is generally the best time. There's almost no wind, or much less wind. So you don't have a lot of evaporation of your water, so you get the most bang for your buck when you're watering. You can actually reduce the length of the leaf wetness period, because you're watering when it's early and then the sun comes out and dries the plant. Another big benefit is if you have disease issues, it's sometimes counterintuitive for people, but when you water, it actually causes your grass to dry faster. Golf courses do this all the time, because it knocks the dew off the leaf and causes your grass, once the sun does come up, it dries a lot faster, and that helps us with diseases. There's no people around to shoot with a sprinkler. I found out that people in my neighborhood don't like to get shot in the face with my sprinkler. They let me know about that. My neighbors do. And generally in the morning, if you live in a neighborhood, a larger neighborhood, there's better water pressure in the mornings. This is just a diagram that if you're doing a good job watering, your grass roots will look like that. If you're providing infrequent, deep watering, at least getting the soil wet down to 4 to 5 inches, and that takes a lot of water to do that per 1,000 square feet, your grass roots will look like this. If you're watering too much, or you're in wet soils, the roots won't penetrate into this wet zone, and they'll be shallow. If you don't have enough moisture, you have a grass root system here that's searching. Most of the fibrous root component is deep in the soil, and your root system is going to look like this on the far right. If you are doing a lot of, we see this on the far right more than any situation, is that you have grass roots here that are responding to those frequent light waterings, and you have grass roots here still looking for moisture, because you're not supplying all the water that the grass needs. So if you water too often and only get the soil wet 1/2 inch deep, your root system is going to look like this one here on the far right. The ideal would be the left. Infrequent, deep waterings. And I just use a watering cup, or I'll take a screwdriver, stick into the soil to see how deep I've gotten that moisture down, and that's how I determine how much. It's kind of a low-tech way to determine how much to water my home lawn. Take a screwdriver, kind of wiggle that around, see how deep I've gotten the water to go. A little bit about drought tolerance. First thing you can do is choose a tolerant turf species. Tall fescue is very deeply rooted, in this is all turf fescue here for the most part in this picture, except for these clumps of Kentucky 31. First of all, Kentucky 31 is generally not desirable, but boy, Kentucky 31 has a great, really deep root system. So you'll see these clumps of this, what I almost consider a weed, Kentucky 31 now in home lawns. You'll see this is still doing great, and it's green when everything else is brown. Well, the problem with Kentucky 31 is that it clumps. It forms these tremendous clumps, and that's very undesirable in a home lawn. This is turf fescue that's gone dormant. It'll probably recover in the fall. It's got a little cast of green to it. But you have I can pick out a Kentucky 31 fescue clump because it has a tremendously deep root on it compared to other types of fescue. But sometimes you'll have this be an issue in your home lawn, as you'll get these big clumps of old-fashioned fescue starting. A little bit about lawn weed control, and take a real quick look here at the chart. You'll notice that the time has already passed for most pre-emergent herbicide applications for home lawns. You'll find that the time has passed for that, and now we're into post herbicides, and we're actually, for me, the period's ending for post herbicide applications, except for grassy weeds. A lot of times we're trying to control broadleaf weeds in our home lawn. I don't really recommend a lot of those. You'll see that for broadleaf weeds, I don't recommend, and UK doesn't recommend, a lot of applications during the summer because those applications can really stress your home lawn. Not only that, but when your grass is not growing well, those broadleaf weeds may not be growing well either. You're not going to do a good job of controlling those weeds. But what you are controlling in the summer in some situations is grassy weeds, which is sort of a special scenario with special products for homeowners. If you have a lot of grassy weeds, you are trying to control those during the summer months because that's when they grow. We'll talk more about that in just a second. Another great publication is AGR-208. That's Weed Control for Kentucky Home Lawns. It is a tremendous publication with a lot of specific chemicals and information on where to get those, when to use those. It's my favorite publication. I use it at home as a reference for my own home lawn. If you are interested in home lawn weed control, I urge you to go and take a look at that publication. It's excellent. It's AGR-208, University of Kentucky. That's how you find that. The best weed control for a home lawn is, this goes back to that crabgrass slide I showed several slides ago, but the best weed control is a thick, healthy lawn. If you get your lawn nice and thick, it's going to be very resistant to weed seeds, first of all, getting to the soil, and second of all, being able to germinate on a cool, shaded soil. And you can make sure that you have a thick and healthy lawn, by following the prescription today, but it's all about your turf grass selection, the way you mow, irrigation as needed, soil drainage, overseeding. Sometimes every 2 to 3 years, most home lawns can benefit from some overseeding in specific situations, and how you fertilize and how you use herbicides. All of those things add to your grass being nice and thick and healthy and being weed resistant. Here, I just wanted to show some pictures of summer broadleaf weeds. Hopefully you've got some of these already taken care of, because once again, we're entering that hot, dry period. You have to be careful when controlling the summer broadleaf weeds or putting down weed chemicals to control those, because those chemicals themselves can be a stressor on your tall fescue lawns. What I do in the summer for summer broadleaf weeds, if I've not already got a handle on those, by using a pre-emergent chemical or a post-emergent a little bit earlier and taking care of most of those problems, I'll spot treat. If I've got a hot spot of clover, I won't spray my entire lawn. I'll spray just that section of the clover. But I wanted to have some pictures of summer broadleaf weeds, some common ones, and some tips here to go by. Most of these are controlled with applications of what I call three-way products, and by that I mean that products with 3 active ingredients listed. They come in different formulations, but generally they do a pretty good job of most broadleaf weeds if you follow the label correctly. Always keep in mind that if you're going to put down a weed control chemical, if it's a post-emergent control, weeds need to be actively growing to take in that chemical. Otherwise, by that I mean, if you're going to spray a weed in your lawn that's drought stressed, you're not going to probably do a real good job of controlling that weed in your lawn because it's not going to be actively growing. It's not going to take in the chemical. Keep in mind, you can get most of these herbicides in liquid or granular. If you're going to use the granular herbicides, you should always read the label carefully. All chemical labels you should read carefully, but the granulars in particular don't work well if you don't put those down. Most of those don't work well if you don't put those down when the leaf surface of the grass is wet, because it's when it's wet, you put down the granule. The granule is designed to stick to that leaf blade, and then it does a good job of weed control. So if you use a granule, keep that in mind. That's a very important point. Never spray when it's hot and there's wind blowing in the summer, and those are conditions. But high wind or high temperature, don't put down a lot of weed controls, because you can have very unsatisfactory results, or at worst, you can have off-target movement and kill desirable plants that are nearby. My golden rule for lawn weed control is weeds are easier to control if they are young and actively growing. If the weed has enough moisture and it's young enough, that's the time to put down your weed controls. And a good example of this is crabgrass. Crabgrass that's young and actively growing is not terribly hard to control, but once that crabgrass gets old and the conditions get hot and dry, you're not going to do anything by putting down weed control, post-emergent weed control on that crabgrass. It doesn't work very well at all. Just some examples of lawn weeds that I see. This is black medic. It's pretty common. Carpet weed, I see that a lot, especially on thin lawns. It's low growing, so it escapes the mower blades. Ground ivy is another one that I have in my own lawn. It's not terribly hard to control, but it escapes the lawnmower, so it kind of grows under the mower blade, so it can get a foothold. Knotweed, that one's pretty common. It's a low grower. You'll notice the theme here with low growing. The broadleaf weeds that give us the most trouble sometimes are the ones that are low growing. And the plantains, the different ones there, the buckhorn and the broadleaf plantains, they can all cause weed control issues in our lawn. Spurge, I see that a lot here in Bourbon County. It's common, and you'll know it by these tiny little purple sections of the weed. White clover, you'll notice when it gets hot and dry, a lot of times the only thing you'll see growing in your lawn is white clover. Some people don't consider that a weed and they don't mind it being in their lawn. It all depends on what your objectives are. Some people it's a weed, some people it's not. The white clover, you'll see it actively growing when tall fescue is not. Wild violet is one that I see a lot. It has a waxy leaf coating, so you have to use a spreader sticker with lawn chemicals. To actually coat that leaf effectively to get control of it, you have to add what I call a surfactant. And if you have questions on that, you can give your local county extension agent a call. But you need to add a spreader sticker, or what some people call a surfactant, to make lawn control chemicals stick to that leaf surface. Yellowwood sorrel, it's another one I see a lot. But some of the winter annual broadleaf weeds, these are ones that I see that you're going to see over the winter time into spring. A lot of people don't put down weed control for these because they're not spraying at a time when these things start to grow, which is late fall into winters when they start to grow. So it's a winter annual. Get back to where I need to be here. It's a winter annual, and that should tell you that it's an annual. Its life cycle completes in 1 year, and it grows in the cooler months in the winter. Some common winter annuals, and a couple of notes about it before we look at the pictures. If you have specific problems, you may want to put down a fall applied pre-emergent herbicide. That can be beneficial if you have problems with any of these following weeds. But if you plan on seeding any desirable lawn grasses, do not put down these pre-emergents, because in some cases they'll cause your lawn grass seed not to germinate. So be cautious of that. Some common weeds that fall into this category is bedstraw, catchweed bedstraw. That's one I see quite a bit of here locally. Chickweed, tremendous amount. I see that in almost all home lawns. It's a winter annual, so it's in the cool season of the months, particularly in the spring. We see it and then it kind of goes away. That's corn speedwell. It's got a tiny little blue flower. I see it everywhere. It's one that's not typically controlled because, once again, we're not spraying. Generally, homeowners aren't spraying a lot in the late fall, early spring. Henbit, I see a lot of that. It's really common. It's it has a purple bloom on it that's really distinct. A lot of times you'll find it growing where chickweed is growing. Prickly lettuce, I see that being a problem in certain cases. Purple dead nettle, that's the one that's kind of related to henbit, except it's literally more purple. And shepherd's purse, I see a lot of that. That's all examples of winter annual weeds that I see here locally. Annual grassy weeds are tougher to control in our home lawns in some cases. Crabgrass is probably the most common. Once again, these are annual grassy weeds. They complete their life cycle in 1 year. So the approach for annual grassy weeds tends to be twofold. You use a pre-emergent early in the year, which we're not talking about that. That time's already passed. Use a pre-emergent if you had a problem with crabgrass in the past, and then you can do a post-emergent control, the seeds that germinate that you miss with the pre-emergent. You can go ahead and spray those at certain times of the year with a post-emergent. Foxtail is another real common one. Goosegrass, it's another summer annual. And the perennial grassy weeds that are a lot tougher to control. Call your extension office about these guys. You have to have a total strategy to control these particular weeds. The one that gives us the most trouble is Bermudagrass. It's perennial, which means it lasts from year to year in different structures within the grass. So it's very persistent in our home lawns, and it's very difficult to control. Yeah, it's with weeds such as Bermudagrass, sometimes it's just easier to spot treat those with a non-selective to kill everything and then go back in and renovate that in the fall. Trying to get to other grass-like weeds that I see. I'm going to skip through some of these slides. We're running out of time here very quickly. Is yellow nutsedge. You'll find that around air conditioning units or wet areas. It's pretty common, but fortunately they're selective products specifically designed to kill yellow nutsedge. And here's just some examples of products. The no recommendations applied or implied with these products. It's just what I went and snapped pictures of at my local store to kind of make a point. But here's weed control products on the local, I think it was the Southern States or Tractor Supply, where I was at this day a few months ago. I just went and snapped a bunch of pictures of labels. The first one was probably one of the most important to me, and it's not even a herbicide. It's not even a chemical, but it's a spreader sticker, otherwise known as a surfactant, and it has one purpose in your home lawn. If you're going to spray chemicals to control weeds in your home lawn on these slick leaf surfaces, you'll spray it on there, and if you don't use this product on the left, the spray material will look like this. It'll roll off the leaves and won't do a lot of good. If you use the product on the left, it'll look like this. The product literally makes your spray material spread over the surface of the leaf and stick to the leaf, and that's a very desirable situation. Pay close attention to this product. It's not a chemical that's designed to kill lawn weeds. It's a chemical designed to make those chemicals work better. That's what it is. Weed begone, I mean, all of these are just things that I've seen on the shelf. Once again, I'm looking at the active ingredients. You probably can't see it on your screen if you're a small screen. It's got 3 active ingredients. I'd call that a classic 3-way chemical. Here's an odd one I saw, that's Speed Zone. It's a 4-way chemical. It's not only 3, it has 4 active ingredients. It's a little bit more expensive. It says specialized chemical, poison ivy control. It had one very powerful active ingredient, triclopyr, and it was sold in the lawn section for lawn weed control. I wish they would have moved that to another section because it's a specialty product. It can be used on home lawns, but it's designed more to kill brushy type weeds such as poison ivy. Here's all the crabgrass killers. You know, crabgrass control is incorporated into a lot of homeowner products, and these are all very similar. They have different labels, but they're very similar. And some of these, like Tenacity, I know homeowners can get a hold of those, but I'm very surprised to kind of find that on the shelves now. It used to be a professional only product, but now you can purchase this product for home weed control from Amazon or your local, box store. You can purchase products like this, but if you ever do use them, pay really close attention to the labels. You don't want to use more than the label allows because you can do damage to your desirable grasses. ProSedge and some of these others, the same statement I just made applies. These are very powerful products. They were on the shelf for homeowners, but you have to really, really read the instructions very carefully, follow them to the letter, and do not apply any more than what the label allows because you'll do some damage to your lawn. all of these products. And then you have your granules. This is just a granule weed treatment for lawns. We'll skip through grass seeding. The one thing you need to remember about grass seeding in Kentucky is that the best window is August through September. It is far better than the second best option. The second best option, if you can put down some water, is mid-February through March. But by far, the best option is fall, and that's coming up, the fall seeding window. And I'm going to skip through some of these and go straight to grub control because we get this question so very much. Grubs that we have in our home lawns look like this. These C-shaped little grubs that are the immature stages of things like Japanese beetles, mass chafer beetles. That's the immature version of those beetles that live in the soil. In their life cycle, we typically start seeing those around June and July. You start to see Japanese beetles, you see the mass chafers. That's a little bullet-shaped brown. They're shaped like a Japanese beetle, but they're brown. Mass chafers are. That's common for them to be grubs in your home lawn also. We start to see those in June and July. And there's specific control windows for these grubs that can cause dead spots in your lawn. But in fescue lawns, they typically recover, so I don't recommend a lot to take a whole lot of aggressive action against white grubs. But sometimes I see these indiscriminate, sort of indistinct brown areas of home lawns. And if you go out there and peel back that turf and it peels back really easy and you see a situation like this, it's time to do grub control. A few grubs are okay, but what grubs do is they feed on the roots of turf grasses. It's more of an issue with some of the other turf grasses than it is fescue. Fescue has the ability to kind of be somewhat resistant naturally in that they make more roots. But even with saying that, they can cause a situation for dead spots to come out in your lawn, even with tall fescue, if you have a heavy infestation. But two control strategies, and I'll end with that, is that for grubs, you have the preventative strategy, and that is long-acting products that are best applied May through July. I like to personally get those down May through June, and that's broadcast treatments, or typically granules that you put over a large area. The other scenario is the curative approach. Is all of a sudden I come out, I look at your lawn, I say, oh my goodness, you have a grub problem. You need to put down a rescue treatment or a curative treatment. And those treatments are pretty specific. They are different than the preventatives. They have different active ingredients and they work differently, but you can put down those chemical applications in July through August and they do a good job. If you find out you've got a problem with grubs, you primarily want to put down those rescue treatments July through August for grubs. And the main reason why it has to be July through August, because once a grub emerges and lays its eggs, it lays its eggs back into the soil. And what those eggs do is they hatch, they form the immature larva, and that larva starts to go deep in the soil. And if you wait past about here, the grub is so deep in the soil, you cannot effectively get those granulars to penetrate, those granule chemicals to penetrate into your soil deep enough to control grubs, so they don't do a good job. So that's why I say if you're taking the curative approach, only apply those products typically July through August. And I'll end with a lawn renovation checklist and then take questions. I think this was one of the materials that everyone has access to. So if you need this, contact your local agent or one of the organizers for the program today, Amy or Sharon.